So here's a question for you. What if one country holds one of the most genetically diverse, historically rich, and, well, politically controversial gene pools on Earth? Today, we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. Russia's a truly unique genetic landscape. We've gathered some fascinating sources, studies from Nature, reports from the Human Genome Diversity Project. Our mission is really to unpack why Russia's genetic tapestry is just so different from almost anywhere else. Researchers tell us Russia's gene pool spans across two continents. It covers more than 190 recognized ethnic groups, and it tells a story shaped over thousands of years. We're talking human migration, conquest, periods of isolation, incredible adaptation. It's not just one gene pool, it's more like a genetic galaxy. We often think of Russia as the largest country by landmass, right? But maybe it's also the most genetically layered population on the planet.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating, I think, is how both historians and geneticists point out that Russia's DNA just profoundly reflects its geography. I mean, think about it. It's a natural bridge between Europe and Asia. It connects the Arctic with Central Asia, the Baltics with Siberia. This isn't just some abstract idea. It's literally, etched into the genes of the people. So it means modern Russians aren't really a single monolithic ethnic group. They're genuinely this genomic patchwork, almost like a living record of all that movement, those migrations, the empires rising and falling.
Okay, so this genomic patchwork, let's break that down. What specific genetic threads are actually woven into it? What kind of ancestry traces are we seeing from projects like the Human Genome Diversity Project?
Well, first, you definitely have clear Slavic ancestry. That's sort of the dominant East European route, especially in the western parts of Russia, as you'd probably expect. But then you also find really significant Finno-Ugric and Uralic genes. These connect to groups like the Komi, the Mari, the Nenets, peoples who traditionally lived across vast areas from near Scandinavia way over towards Siberia,
Yeah.
and often speaking very different language families.
Right, and it doesn't stop there, does it? It stretches even further east and south, bringing in influences from huge distances.
Oh, absolutely. You see strong Turkic lineages.
Yeah.
Think groups like the Tatars, the Bashkirs, the Yakuts, people spread across Central Asia and deep into Siberia historically. And then from even further east, you pick up Mongoloid genetic signals, notably from groups like the Buryats and Ivets, who have ancestral ties to Mongolia and Northeast Asia. And then down in the south, you've got clear Caucasus admixture from peoples like Chechens, Dagestanis, reflecting that whole region's incredibly complex history as a crossroads. It's just an amazing mix.
And this isn't just anecdotal, right? We have actual numbers, hard data that really illustrates this diversity. I know there was a big study in Nature back in 2016. They looked at over 25 Russian subpopulations. What was the headline finding there?
Yeah, that study was quite revealing. It basically confirmed that the genetic variation within Russia itself is actually greater than the variation found between many entire European countries. Just let that sink in for a second. The internal genetic complexity in Russia is arguably higher than comparing, say, France to Spain or Germany. It really drives home the point that this isn't just one uniform Russian identity genetically. It underscores this immense internal diversity that makes up that genomic patchwork we were talking about.
That's pretty striking. And if we zoom in on specific genetic markers, what story do they tell? Like Y-DNA, for example.
Okay, so Y-DNA haplogroup R1A, that's a big one. It's found in roughly 50 to 60% of ethnic Russian men. And Y-DNA, remember, is passed almost exclusively father to son, so it's a direct male lineage marker. This R1A marker links them very strongly to ancient Indo-European groups and also to steppe nomadic peoples like the Scythians and the early Slavs. It shows these really deep historical roots stretching way back across Eurasia.
And what about the female lines? What does mitochondrial DNA show?
Right, so mitochondrial DNA, or mtDNA, which is passed down from mother to all her children, tells the maternal story. And in Russians, you see high frequencies of haplogroups H, U, and T. These are common European lineages. They connect Russian women both to the ancient hunter-gatherers who were in Europe long ago and also to the Neolithic farmers who came up from Anatolia bringing agriculture. So what all this data really hammers home is that Russia was never truly isolated. It was always consistently right there at the center of human movement interaction, a real genetic crossroads.
Now, inevitably, a story this deep and complex doesn't stay out of politics. We know these genetic studies have sometimes been, well, misused in certain Russian nationalist circles. How exactly have findings been sort of weaponized.
Yeah, that's definitely happened. You see some genetic findings being misinterpreted or maybe cherry-picked to push ideas about a pure Slavic gene, whatever that means,
Yeah.
or sometimes to make claims about historical dominance over certain areas because of supposed genetic links to ancient groups. It's kind of a textbook case of science being twisted for a political agenda.
But what's the pushback from the scientific community? Are geneticists countering these claims?
Oh, absolutely. Very strongly. Geneticists are quite clear. There's simply no such thing as genetic purity in any population, let alone one as mixed as Russia's. In fact, the very diversity we've been talking about, this deep documented diversity, is the ultimate proof against those kinds of nationalist myths. It actually shows shared ancestry with dozens of different cultures. And this whole situation really highlights a tension, between scientific openness and state control. You might remember back in 2020, Russia brought in laws restricting the export of genetic material.
Citing national security, I recall.
Exactly. And critics, of course, raised concerns that this could hamper important international research collaborations and reduce transparency in human genetics.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated intersection of science, identity, and state policy.
Precisely. It really underscores the challenges you face when scientific discoveries touch on something as fundamental and sometimes sensitive as human ancestry, especially within certain geopolitical contexts.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. While genetics can get tangled in politics, it also gives us these incredible windows into human adaptation and health. Let's talk about some of the unique biological traits researchers have found in this diverse gene pool. What kind of fascinating adaptations have popped up?
This is where it gets really interesting from a biological standpoint. You see these remarkable adaptations, especially to extreme environments. So take certain Siberian groups like the Yakuts. They show stunning adaptations to extreme cold. If you look at their genomes, you find variations in genes related to fat metabolism, specifically UCP1 variants. These help the body generate heat more efficiently, which is obviously crucial for survival in those incredibly cold places. They also show enhanced activation of brown fat, which is this specialized fat tissue that burns energy specifically to produce heat. Really cool stuff.
Wow, it really makes you appreciate how specialized human biology can become. It's incredible. And beyond just adapting to cold, what about medical insights? Does studying these populations offer potential for, say, treatments?
Yes, definitely. Some isolated populations, like maybe the Pumors near the White Sea, or certain old believer communities who lived in isolation for centuries, they sometimes have a higher prevalence of specific rare genetic diseases. Studying these groups can be incredibly valuable. Because they are relatively isolated, genetically speaking, it can be easier to pinpoint the exact genetic basis of certain conditions.
Mm.
This offers unique opportunities for developing targeted genetic therapies. And then there's this other intriguing detail. Russian genomes generally show a lower prevalence of lactase persistence. That's the genetic trait allowing adults to digest milk sugar, lactose.
Which is surprising, right? Because dairy is pretty central in many traditional Russian diets.
Exactly. It hints that maybe cultural adaptation, like fermenting dairy into kefir or tworog, which reduces lactose, might have been more significant or happened faster than a widespread genetic shift towards lactase persistence. It shows culture and biology interacting.
So really, the Russian gene pool is this amazing case study in genomic resilience, biological adaptation to all sorts of extremes. It just seems packed with information for human health and evolution.
It really is. It highlights how populations adapt not just genetically but culturally too. That interplay between our biology and our behavior is just fascinating to see played out on such a grand scale.
Which brings us to that huge, almost philosophical question that people have debated for ages. Are Russians primarily European or Asian? It's more than just culture, right? The genetics actually weighs in here pretty heavily. What do the findings tell us about this whole Eurasian question?
Right, connecting back to the genetics, well, some research suggests that modern Russians, on average, might carry somewhere between, say, 10% and 25% Central Asian and Siberian genetic admixture. This signal is often more noticeable in regions like the Urals or the Volga area closer to Asia. It provides that clear genetic link eastward, reflecting centuries of movement and interaction.
But then if you look west, it's a different picture.
Totally different. In the western parts of Russia, genetically speaking, Russians are often largely indistinguishable from their immediate Western neighbors, Poles, Ukrainians, Belarusians, very strong European genetic ties there.
So the answer to the European or Asian question is?
The answer from the genes seems to be yes, all of the above. They really embody this genomic bridge concept, a true blend of influences from both continents, Eurasian in the most literal sense.
So wrapping this up, why is the Russian gene pool so special? I think it's clear now it's not one single story. It's this incredibly tangled epic, isn't it? You've got echoes of Mongol invasions, Viking traders navigating rivers, the deep isolation of Siberian communities, the massive movements during the Soviet era, plus the deep Slavic roots, the nomadic influences. It feels like a gene pool that's just too vast for borders, too ancient for any single label, and definitely way too complex for simplistic propaganda.
Beautifully put. And this incredible complexity, this tapestry, leaves us with a really interesting thought, doesn't it? Something for you, the listener, to maybe reflect on. Does Russia's incredibly diverse DNA ultimately prove we're all far more connected than divided, showing these shared human journeys across immense landscapes? Or perhaps does its sheer diversity raise brand new questions about history, identity, and culture that we're only just starting to grapple with? Genes might be silent, but sometimes they tell the loudest, most unexpected stories.